Welcome, friends of the Crawford, to this St Patrick's Day special, and a happy St Patrick's Day from Bernadette and myself too. We reached out to the arts community in Cork, and in particular to Conal Creedon, Cork's finest storyteller, and he very graciously gave us his time via Zoom to share his memories of St Patrick's Day, both personal and cultural. So put on the kettle, it's definitely worth watching, and sit back and relax. So anyway, have you got the tea made in West China?
I have, but I have, because the last week or so, on a totally different thing, I was sort of researching Patrick's Day, right? And I went down a bit of a rabbit hole on that whole world, and it's actually fairly interesting. And I might dip into that if you don't mind.
Yes, and this is to do with the Celtic goddess Sheila.
Well, that, and there's Law and Bow Reebok as well, the Brindled Cow Day, and then there's this Sheila the Brush, it's called. But it's that whole world, yeah. And the reasoning why is because it actually ties into where we are at the moment, because like we think that Celtic tradition, or for example, pagan tradition, is an awful long time ago, but it's actually fairly recent. And so, for example, like a lot of these pishogues, for the want of a better word, are actually very recent. Sheila's Day, I came across two court cases where the defendants claimed that they were drunk because it was Sheila's Day. One was in 1831, which isn't that long ago for a pagan festival, right? Mm-hmm. And the other one was in 1841, right? One was a highwayman, a famous man called William Collier. And the other one, I think, was a Cork woman. She was found drunk and disorderly, and she just said, look, I was, and they used to wet the shamrock for Sheila's Day, which is interesting, right?
Oh, but, that is interesting. Yeah, so same, yeah, carrying through to the tradition.
It probably had to do with that. And I suppose what I found about it was that people used to go into lockdown from, we'd say, before Christmas until April, because wintertime was a time of like viruses, flus, all that kind of thing, right? They used to basically seal up their cottages, seal up their caves or wherever they were in, or their huts. And at Christmas time, they started to come out. And then also there was that gap between Christmas and what we call Easter, sort of spring, where there was a mad urgency, like we're seeing now, where people are saying, come on, can we go? And they're saying, no, you can't. And mid the equinox, basically, Sheilas, which is the 18th of March, people traditionally went out for that, and there'd be a mad hoolie. And the Sheila na gig that we know is the fertility goddess, and it's that whole thing of the rising sap and the buds starting to green, but not enough yet to be out there, right? And people just made a go for it, and it became that thing. And of course, then they'd all go back in, and it became, I suppose, it became a tradition, really, you know. And then there was one other day that was linked onto that, and that was called, and that's fairly recent, because about 20 years ago, an artist, you in the Crawford have a stained glass by him, by James Scanlon, was telling me about this, I suppose, tradition they have in Kerry, Law on Bo Reebok or Rybok, and it's the spotted cow, or the brindled cow's day, right? And that day is, it's not a defined day. I've worked it out since. It's a day that falls in the last 2 weeks of March. And what it is, it's if the old cow, which would be considered the brindled cow or the spotted cow or whatever, lived beyond that bad trench of weather, they'd live another year, meaning elderly people as well, you know. And so it was about that spring would come after that. And then similarly in Newfoundland, they have this, well, Sheila na Guerra is considered to be the first, I suppose, European to give birth to a European child in Newfoundland, right?
Right.
And that's in Carbonear. She's recorded as being that person, right? But then they have this Sheila the Brush, I think is what it's called. But it's a day after St. Patrick's Day. I think it records the first storm or the first bad weather after Patrick's Day, and then after that, it's going to be plain sailing to go fishing. So it's like the day, like Patrick's Day, like St. Patrick died in either 461 or 493. They're not too sure. There's about 50 year or a few hundred year, 50 years in the difference, right? But they know precisely the date, and that's what I find interesting, right? Because in the 1630s, the church decided that the date he died was the 17th of March, and it happened to coincide with Sheila's day, which is the 18th of March. And I always find that, you know, even to the present day, there's a real sense of almost St. Patrick's traditionalists sort of really poo-pooing or saying, "Oh, I hate it. It's gone so. It's all about the pubs and it's all about this and the
Yeah,
tradition is gone." Whereas in fact, it was always about the pubs and the roaring and the shouting, and that's the mad thing about it. It was these young people who were mad to get out of
yeah.
the
It's
cottages.
locked in
Just
for so long that you're left out.
yeah,
It's just the madness that occurs when you're left out again. Yeah.
absolutely, and I think that that's sort of one of the things that, uh, in a funny way, at a certain age, you're sort of going to deny it about that that it is about that craziness of like partying and stuff. No, it's actually about the music and it's about the tradition and it's about the bacon and cabbage, but it's not. You know, it's, I suppose, different horses for different, you know, and even the whole Cheltenham thing all happening around this time of year. It's about giving the horses their own. It's that whole thing, and I think sometimes we forget our pagan past. And the funny thing is, what I found really interesting in what I've been reading recently is that our pagan past was very in tune with the seasons. And the funny thing is, like, you know, they talk about man, meaning the human species, not so much man himself or a gender type, but that the human species shaping a landscape, right? But it's not really, it's actually the landscape shapes the humans. You know, if you live in a rocky place, that's the kind of humans you're going to have there, right? And but similarly, um, the seasons shape us, and you know, I suppose our new post-pagan are. So I think we should say Happy Sheila's Day, really. Uh, bring back the pagan goddess, you know, and cut the messing. Really.
That's what you're saying. What you're saying all connects back in with the land, with with nature basically. So it's all coming back to what everything comes back to at the end of the day. So it's fitting in with the seasons because we're only here for such a small, teeny tiny length of time, and of course, fitting into the grander scheme of nature and what it's all about. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so it's all pulling it back in. um so what we were thinking of is, when we were thinking of all these traditions and of telling stories and of the singing and the dancing, and I suppose leading up, I think it's interesting too that leading up to St. Patrick's Day, when you were a child, we'll say, right, you always recognized a sort of a giddiness in the adults around you. So I always think there was this giddiness that erupted, and it passed through in the couple of days leading up to Patrick's Day. So somebody who would normally be fairly grouchy or whatever, all of a sudden is smiling, and the minute they put on a bit of shamrock, it's like they're nodding and saying hello to everybody. And that transferred down to all the generations, smaller and smaller, so that continues to occur today, even still. It just amazes me that everybody's moods are lifted by this, and whether it's from being locked inside for so long and all of a sudden it's the opening again of the doors and letting people out, that everybody is connecting back with each other. And that's exactly, I suppose, where we were going with it, the connection, to not only the people living here, but when you're living abroad, all of a sudden you've got people coming to your home on St. Patrick's Day who you haven't even met before, because they're Irish, and because there's something about that day that pulls all people back together and connects people, no matter whether you knew them beforehand or not. Yeah.
And I think it's fairly incredible, really, that considering we are such a small little nation, really, in a small country and a relatively new nation, we're as in established, not too long, right? That this celebration is really so global, and it's I think maybe it's because we're perceived to be non-political, or it's perceived to be non-political. Maybe it's because it's perceived to be as pagan as Christian, I don't know. But like I was amazed that, for example, in Shanghai, they have a Patrick's Day parade, and it's really popular. I mean, it started really small, but it's really popular. But they don't have, for example, a Bastille Day parade, and they don't have a 4th of July parade, and they don't, so like it's that's a huge credit to not only our tradition, but to I suppose, the diaspora over there, who are, obviously insisting that something this is a good thing to carry forward. And of course, America, every country across the world, I always find it intriguing that no matter what crossroads, village or town you go to, right, in the whole world, that you'll find like an Irish bar. And I always think that's mad, right? But I remember I think I may have been tasted before, when they opened the first Irish bar in Shanghai. It was insane, right? Because um, the Taoiseach was there, half of Riverdance was there, like RTE, Irish Times, ESB, anything with any letters, they were all over there, right? And there was newspapers, everything, right? And I remember I was thinking, this is incredible. Now, it's a real small bar. It wouldn't be much bigger than, it's just an ordinary pub, right? And it just crossed my mind. I said, could you imagine if the same thing happened every time a Chinese restaurant opened, It'd be insane, right? So our own sense of self-importance is very important as well,
Oh,
and
yeah.
to actually reach out and take that space that we believe we deserve, But you were asking about Patrick's Day, as in Cork, and my particular memories. The funny thing is that I live on Coburg Street, and I live right next door to where I was born, which was a little shop, right? And back then, it was before the supermarket was invented. So what you had is, shops were like barricades. You had counters. So it was a small room, and there was a counter, and everybody stood behind the counter. And I don't know if you know that film Bourges, but at one point, when most of the Foreign Legion had been killed, they propped the dead bodies up against to make it look like there was still more there. Well, on a busy day, that's more what it was like. You get anybody to man the barricades, basically, right? And St. Patrick's Day back then, right? If you think about it, there was no Christie Ring Bridge, which is now probably the busiest artery in the whole city. Christie Ring Bridge, that wasn't there, right? So every single individual from, I would say, even the Western Road, because they would cross the bridges up along, right? From the Western Road, Sundayswell, Blarney Street, what is now Knocknaheeny, Grawn, Churchfield, Farnry, down to Blackpool, then every single individual will have to walk up our street, right? So you're talking about 60 or 70,000 people, right? Walking up our street. It was bananas, right? Which was all fine and dandy, right? Because they would pass you up along over a few hours, right? But the moment the parade ended, that 70,000 people would come into our shop, right? Looking for ice cream. And it was absolutely insane. So I never saw the end of the parade, because we'd have to get home to man the barricades, But that's like, I know of a guy whose father was a really big sportsman. Well, people thought he was a big sportsman, but I think there was another reason why, basically. So he used to go to every football match, every rugby match, every hurling match, every tiddlywinks match, but it actually had to do with going to the pub, right? But his son was telling me that he was 20 years of age. It was only when his father has died that he realized how a soccer game started. He never knew how a game began, because they'd be in the pub and then they'd run in. And he never saw the start of a game. And he always thought it started like hurling, because in hurling and football, they throw the ball in, right?
Yeah.
But in soccer, they actually kick the ball to each other, right?
Yeah.
And he's, what's happening here? So I never saw the end of a Patrick's Day parade. That's the and see, back then the Patrick's Day parade used to gather down by the railway station. It's where they used to keep the cattle overnight before they put them onto the livestock express. So there was a big gathering area there, right? And then it would come up along McCurtain Street and down along across Patrick's Bridge.
Yeah.
But the thing was, McCurtain Street was your perfect place for viewing, because the footpath there, believe it or not, had actually 2 steps to the road, right? They've raised the road since, so you would sort of have 3 layers of standing along McCurtain Street
to raise you higher.
Then you had the slope of Patrick's Hill, so it was the perfect place.
Now that's interesting, because you mentioned that, because I was going to ask you, I was thinking about it, saying it's one of those things when you're going into town to watch the parade and it's the best viewpoint. Where are you going to
Where
go? Can you cross the barricades? Which way is the sun going to be shining? You don't want to be in the, the windy side of the street. You want to be in the sunny side of the street. So the best vantage point was, as you say, McCurtain Street to watch it.
you know, it's yeah, back then, but they've changed now because it's all on the island,
Yeah.
right? But and I could be wrong here, but a friend of mine used to live in a flat upstairs from the Berwick Fountain,
Yeah.
and he had to go. They had a child, so he went out and onto the South Main Street to get something, could be milk or bread or whatever, right? And by the time he came back, the barricades were up, and there were these, these people saying, "Sorry, no, you can't. Sorry, no, no, we're under orders out from the Lord Mayor himself. Nobody can come across the road, right? It'll be coming with it." And he had to walk about 5 miles to go home to get home, right? Because he had to go right up on Patrick Street. So I suppose that would be my big memory. The other memory then would be the different traditions. I suppose when I was a kid, John A. Wood's trucks and cement mixers were a huge draw.
Yeah.
Like I remember people say, "Whoa, would you look at that?" Right? Because they were doing trucks in town, really, right?
Yeah.
And then at a certain point, I think it sort of tied in with that whole time of Charlie's Angels and all that. The majorettes,
with the batons.
Yeah, but like every school girl guides unit, every convent, every had a majorette outfit, right? And like they wouldn't like this. They wouldn't be, I suppose, as proficient as we say, but because the American majorettes are professional, right?
Yeah.
So basically, like a lot of homemade uniforms that were made with great love and care, and a lot of battens flying left, right, and centre. Right? It was a case of duck, but I think at one point I remember, God, it must have been the early '80s. There was sort of, some from City Hall made a decree that we'd have to cut back on the majorettes because there were just too many groups of them, right? Every majorette, and I don't know how they did it, but I remember thinking, actually, they're right. There are too many majorettes. There's going to, if trouble breaks out there, and they're all armed, like they all have these sticks. It'd be like a faction fight. You'd never stop it. But so that was the other big trend. And then since then, I haven't been there that often since.
There's quite a change in it over the years. It's incredible to see how it has progressed because it's so diverse now with all of the new floats and with all of the new communities that are entering in, and there's practically every group is represented in the St Patrick's Day parade now. So it's a totally it really is gone into the kind of the all singing, all dancing big production now versus what it would have been with your floats, your mid floats, whatever they were called long ago, and I think you'd have been probably the statue of Our Lady on the would have led the procession and that, and watching that being balanced precariously on the poles and things, but yeah, and then the throwing out of the sweets and things as well. That was another big thing back then. Right. That was your duck moment as well.
But the funny thing is that, and I think it's as much as I loved the naivety of what it would have been when I was a kid, right? I must say, I like the whole development of parades in Cork has been incredible. Like, for example, I probably get the word wrong here, the Dragon of Shandon, or
that's the one for Halloween, the Dragon of Shandon. Yeah,
spectacular. And then I've seen other ones like the jazz parades that go up along the Old Plunkett Street, really sophisticated. And it actually goes to show that really it's not about duration. Like you can have a really tight parade that would I remember when I was a kid, a parade would be almost measured by how long it took to pass, that it was still coming. It went on for 5 hours. It must have been incredible, right? Whereas if you look at the jazz festival parades, I've only seen them on YouTube and things that pass up along North Main Street. They're fairly spectacular, and they're gone past in 20 minutes, whatever, right? And yet they cover a lot of ground, a lot of different communities, a lot of different types of music, and really high spec, and I think maybe that in itself is a huge development, and it's a way forward that that whole thing of having I remember at one point when I was getting more cynical, and the funny thing is, I went through a phase becoming very cynical, and then maybe about 10 years ago becoming less cynical, right? And they say that men basically get grumpier when they get older, and I'm just saying, "Gee, I don't know, can I take a cynical phase again if it comes back in, right?" But I used to be very cynical at one point, and I remember thinking that, Jesus, the Patrick's Day Parade is like a traffic jam, you know? And that's all, it was like cement mixers and caravans and all that kind of stuff, and fellas wave you out the window. But uh, I've passed the cynical phase at the moment for a while. Hopefully, it stays with me, the positivity, and but I do think that, and even that is a way of the future, that parade, but a one that's very much, I suppose, driven by, in a way, City Hall to the outside units that can pull it together. Like, you know, that they're like, I don't even know these groups, but when they do put stuff together, it looks incredible. And particularly the Shandon when I was the big one that jumps out. But you know,
Oh, Shandon is incredible. That one, the work that goes into those clothes. I think it's the Shandon Arts Group or something. I'm not exactly sure because I had looked into it previously, but the work that goes on months in advance into that, into the floats that are made there are absolutely,
and so
and Douche as well, I think, is involved in that one. But it's incredible the work that goes into it, and they're encouraging everybody from across all of the communities to join in and to get involved in creating them. And it really is pulling something together. And I know I went down around the Colkay area afterwards. There's you know, juggling, so they're bringing in,
yeah,
and same in culture night as well, actually, juggling, where the circus, who is it, the circus crowd from Cork, I can't think of the name of them now, but they do, they'll train you up basically in all of the street art.
yeah.
It's all to do with street art and performing arts, and it really makes a kind of a whole occasion out of it, you know.
Yeah, and very organic, and it's definitely the way forward. You know that you know, for to sort of encourage that kind of thing, because I think particularly as time is going on, we're becoming more an outdoor culture anyway. You know.
I think that this is the way it's going to go as well. Yeah, I mean, I think and it taps back into just that whole, you know, when you were mentioning earlier about why would it be that this opening of the bar in Shanghai would have such an event, and why is it that everybody looks for, and I think there's something about the Irish kind of psyche and about the Irish persona abroad, and something in our genetic makeup, that's kind of the reason that it takes off so well for the Irish people, and that it's the connectedness that you are looking for, and that you'll find in, you know, all of these festivals, which we now are really beginning to value. So all of the kind of
Yeah,
time that goes into them are really valued now.
and also like that, you know, if people aren't really careful, you could become very cynical about the whole thing, right? But uh, really, these things are very genuine, and I think they're actually heartfelt as well. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about the Sheila and about those old, like, it has to do with where we are, like even on the globe, right? That there is a need to celebrate and there is a need to come together. And I know at the moment it's probably a bit stronger because of what's happening with COVID and the pandemic and all that. But I think traditionally there was a very because see, traditionally what would happen is when these people who were isolating because of winter and because of their food stores and that kind of stuff, when that would all pass and Easter would come, then suddenly it becomes like that whole season of Mehel where you have people coming together and for harvest, for ploughing, for sowing, and it becomes hugely communal again for maybe not a full 6 months, maybe 5 months. And then suddenly it's all about storing the wood, storing the food, locking down again, right? And it's because, you know, we didn't have central heating, we didn't have triple glaze, we didn't have solar heating. It was basically just where we were. And I think basically what happened is that some bright spark, maybe about 200 years ago, invented the Industrial Revolution, and basically told people, do you know what? You could work every day of the year if you wanted to, right? Just means going to town and getting a job and forget about the weather. And but we're not that far from it. We're not far from our in touch with nature, and it's actually in us. You know, it's in us to celebrate at this time. you know, and it's in us to chill out in January and February as well, you know, just as much.
Does it kind of warm your heart to feel we're returning a bit more to it, that, you know, appreciation is definitely there more? You see more people out walking now, more people. I mean, even bird watch, what do they call Bird Watch Ireland are saying their numbers are through the roofs and things. People are beginning to talk about migratory birds, talk about all these things that had been overlooked for years, I suppose.
To the friends of the Crawford before I go, right? Because it's something that my father said to me, and it's how it registers deeply, actually, right? I remember once he was telling me about, you know, St. Patrick has the whole thing of driving out snakes and driving out lake monsters and all that, right? Well, we have that in Cork as well, because St. Finbar drove out this called Lou, he had monster and Gugan and Lou. And, you know, we know that there were no snakes in Ireland, they just were never indigenous to here. So it's understood that what they did is they sort of, it was the driving out of a previous belief and a previous sacred shrine to the new belief or the new Christian belief, right? And my father was telling me all that about Lou and how he was driven out by St. Finbar and all that, right? And about the three-leaf shamrock. And I was saying to him, geez, I said, Dad, like, in fairness, you know, and my father was, his spirituality would have been very secular, you know, like he wasn't a big church person, but he basically loved people, right? And I think he saw God in everything that was alive, cats, dogs, people didn't care, right? But I said, geez, do you think, I said that, but he was also very funny, he was a funny man, right? And I said to him, I said, do you really think, I said, obviously it happened, but it must have been very difficult for St. Patrick to convince all those pagan Irish to change their gods, you know? And very quick, he said, you must be joking, he said, we never changed our gods. He said, we only changed our names. And so the point being, this is Sheila's weekend coming up, and but I don't know, I did point out that I have my shamrock just in case. Well, this is going up the street to the coffee shop in a minute as a gift, because people think frontliners during this whole pandemic were the hospitals, and they were, right? But also the people who serve in the supermarkets who never had a day off, really, right? And they're really front line of all of our coughs and sneezes. The people behind the counter of coffee shops were incredible, especially during the first lockdown, because they were the only people we met. And bus drivers and things, right? And huge respect, obviously, for the health people, because they're really the pit face. But coffee shops, bus drivers, and supermarket tillers, very important. Anyway, sorry, I'm talking too much. Sorry.
Not at all. Remind everybody that it was, you know, of your lovely talk that you gave when you came in that time into the lecture hall. I don't know, was that last year, the year before? It must be the year before. And that really had everybody, you know, your magic words just basically engaged everybody. And you had us nearly laughing and crying simultaneously. It was superb. So that memory and the connection of your time in the Crawford, it's always been a special place for you anyway, Conal, hasn't it? Like, you know,
my neighbourhood playground.
Or should we say sheriff, you know? So yeah. So that's something that's wonderful, and it's great to be able to connect back in with you, because I know that it means a lot to you. The Crawford means a lot to you, and it means a lot to it means a lot to me.
And hopefully with this whole thing sorted out, I'm looking forward to going, really, because it's my hometown. Like it's across the street from me. It's so cool, you know. It's so cool when people come to visit, to walk into the Crawford or even the Edmund Palace or the Opera House. It's sort of bizarre, like, really, to be that close to all these lovely things, you know. And
hold you back. Listen, I want to thank you for giving us your time today.
Thank you too. Absolutely.
It's an absolute pleasure, and I know the friends are going to be delighted to hear you and to hear all of your memories of Patrick's Day on the day itself. So especially at a time when they're all in their own homes, and so thanks a million for that, Conal.
And thank you too, Michelle, and happy Sheila's Day.